His name is Uche Nwaukwa. Uche has 15 years of post-degree experience in software development, infrastructure, DevOps, and enterprise architecture. He's a detailed, numerate, and result-oriented, having authored, built, and led digital transformation solutions across banking, telecommunications, and digital native verticals. He's worked in a variety of capacities as CTO, techie, authored. He's built enterprise architecture and software developer, driving global change across every continent of the world. And yet he relaxes with his family and enjoys a game of chess. Uche, please join us. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Excellent. If you go ahead and share your screen, I'll turn the floor over to you, and we will come back in time for Q&A. Please, everyone, if you do have any questions, remember to enter them into the questions on the control panel, and we'll get to them as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. So I'll be talking today about collaborative enterprise architecture. It's quite an interesting topic. I'm passionate about it, and I hope that some of my experiences and the things I'll be sharing with you today will make a whole lot of sense and of course, change your practice for the better. So let's get into it. Yeah, so this is just to introduce enterprise architecture. Basically what you already know. So we've been kind of flooded over the years since 1987 when enterprise architecture became practice and came into being with a weird way of looking at things. So it's a techie practice for the techies. And it just has a bunch of lines and squares and all that. And it seems to have evolved, but it doesn't seem to have evolved as much as the business landscape has evolved. So we understand that the business landscape is absolutely unpredictable with the millennials and even the new age guys and all that. So it becomes absolutely important that we have to find a way to ensure that enterprise architecture still meets value. So there are two things that would happen. It's either we evolve or we go extinct. So and we to be able to evolve, because we don't really want to go extinct, we need to look at why are things changing and what do we need to do. And Gartner gave us a little bit of an idea why the business landscape keeps changing. And this is kind of owing to four major pillars that I call VUCA. And of course, this is about what the business actually looks like today. The business environment is actually very, very volatile. Business is quite uncertain, complex, and highly ambiguous. And it behooves us to understand that this is going to continue this way. Users are always going to change. Needs are always going to change. The world has gone through a whole lot of changes, remote workers, COVID and all that, changing and galloping inflation. Across Africa, across Asia, across the UK, in the US, and this kind of affects how we do business. And of course, we need to justify, every bit of business has to justify their stay and their pay, of course, within the ecosystem of things. And I call it an ecosystem of things because it's no longer about just humans, it's about the businesses that we serve, the internal customers that we serve, the stakeholders, the partners, and all sorts of people that are kind of connected in some sort of way to the business landscape. And of course, that is what we address when we draw those lines and boxes that we are traditionally known for. So when we start spinning off architecture frameworks that seem to be not supportive of the new changing business environment, it becomes a showstopper, it becomes a blocker. And of course, it doesn't give way. It just becomes outdated and cannot adapt to innovation and the changing ecosystem. And so what's the shift? So let me take you back on a little bit of a history lane. So we started off in 1987 defining what the enterprise architecture should look like. And then we went from EA, what we were basically doing with EA then was just basically solution architecture. So we roll out solutions in the form of designs that are kind of hard stock on paper and would need a whole lot of processes and manual processes at that to change. And then we went through from 2016, we started seeing things like business outcome delivery oriented enterprise architecture. That kind of comes to mind easily when you naturally call it body. So that landscape was a kind of enterprise architecture that was deliberate about business outcomes. So it was going to basically start from designing, being redefined, of course. So it shifted from technology first to strategy first. And that's exactly what really happened, because to solve the problems that we have in the business today, we need to have a little bit of strategy in place. And beyond strategy is driven by data. And of course, this data has to come from years and years of practice sometimes, and may not necessarily be archival in that sense. It may be near synchronous, it may be synchronous, it may be just some procedures that have and policies that have been defined by the business as a way of responding to changes. And so how did we get into this EA as a service thing? So EA for me as a service is just value-driven enterprise architecture. So value-driven in the sense that you are not looking at just what the technical aspects of the solution would be. You're looking at those EA as a means to an end. So EA becomes a means to achieve business ends. So first of all, and if you need to achieve business ends, what do you have to do? So how do we achieve EA as a service? Of course, I'm not going to repeat everything on the screen. Of course, all of us are very well versed and can see it, but I would like to look at some keywords. So the value proposition, of course, has to have clear customer outcomes. So this comes with a redefinition. In 1987 and a little beyond that, we were talking about stakeholders, but today we are seeing the stakeholders as customers. So, and it has to meet business data-driven needs. So if you're looking at data, how do we approach the place of data? So data in the sense that you have to be able to collect information, you have to be able to get information out of disparate items or metrics that represent some form of behavior. So these are some of the things that we need to look at. So, and of course, the EA has to be collaborative and beneficial and outcome driven. Now, the keywords there are benefit and outcome driven. So, for instance, if you have to be collaborative, you have to answer the question about what's in it for me. So, because if your audience, if your customers, if your stakeholders do not see how this is going to benefit them, then you won't have their support. and how are you going to get their benefit? How is it going to be beneficial? It's just when you help them meet what their idea of success is. So the EA, enterprise architect of today and tomorrow, must be an advisor. So he must be a trusted advisor, in the sense trusted to the extent that he can be consulted. So the outcome of all this is supposed also to be expressed in business metrics. So I need to be able to come out with an EA solution, or a plethora of solutions, of course, not out of scale, but a set of solutions that actually say these are the outcomes that we hope to achieve first. Secondly, these outcomes would be measurable on so and so terms. So we need to understand what the outcomes would be for our customers, and we need to be able to measure those outcomes, and it has to be repeatable and predictable. So clearly, you need to define what the objectives of business are, and then you have to come up with a set of services that address those objectives. And at the end of the day, you must be able to ensure that those outcomes have been achieved in a measurable form. That is the only way that we can remain relevant in today's changing environment. So how do we achieve this? So the first thing that comes to mind is the needs of the stakeholder. So who in this context is the stakeholder? Going forward, you will notice that I'll start changing from calling them stakeholders to calling them customers, and this is one of the required skills that an enterprise architect must possess. He must be able to understand business in business terms. So instead of calling those people stakeholders, if you approach them from a customer point of view, it has a mind change on its own. So of course, the way you name things, science has proven, also has a way to affect the way you think about them. So it's very important that you must be able to address the needs of this people. Now, who are your customers? Your customers, of course, in an internal basis, may be your execs and their teams. There may also be people who are totally non-IT, have nothing to do with IT per se, emphasized. For instance, if you have somebody sitting in HR, how would a digital transformation exercise be able to address their idea of success? What are their needs, and what outcomes are they expecting to see from what you are proposing to them? So the first thing, for instance, just to buttress this, I had worked in a digital transformation project as an enterprise, as the lead enterprise architect, and I was supposed to engage across board. We had a nice time working with the, at that time, the data center team, trying to move them to more resilient services and automated best practices. And then a part of the whole program was meant to be HR. And of course, human resources, they do not understand, first of all, technical jargon, and they don't need to. And of course, they have their own KPIs that are different from what we do have. So the first thing that we engaged doing was to understand this these KPIs, and repetitively and iteratively, we engage them to ensure that our documented understanding of what their KPIs are exactly what it is. Now, For instance, they were supposed, this is just an assumption, this is not a real figure, just to keep privacy, for privacy reasons. So, for instance, they were supposed to hire 1,000 workers in a year. And of course, they didn't express it in that way to me. They just told me that they're supposed to fill all vacancies. And of course, engaging them and explaining to them and trying to get the right information from them meant that filling vacancies had to be expressed in tangible, measurable terms. And of course, that was defined at the end of the day after we had engaged and re-engaged and documented, and there was an agreement between the enterprise architecture team and the HR team that these are actually KPIs that they intended to communicate when they said fill all vacancies. So these are some of the things that you would find in the field. Now, for instance, who is supposed to be the future EA? Now, the future enterprise architect to me, I believe is the architect that approaches enterprise architecture as a service. So, and of course, this is a major shift because this core techie has to understand business speak. Not only does he need to understand business speak, he has to understand the needs, the outcomes, the benefits, and the approach. Now, this is very, very key. And of course, we approach it from a point of view, and I normally call this NOBA, NOBA. So, of course, the needs, what are the fears that the customers entertain? Most times they'll express them as fears, but those are actually, in business terms, risks. And what is their idea of success? What are the benefits for them? If these benefits are not communicated, you won't get their support because if they know what is in it for them, then they would lend a hand because they feel they're helping themselves anyways. Now, so there has to be a continuous attention without blinking on delivering the needs and the outcomes that have been communicated. So you must understand who the customer is. You must understand what are their expected outcomes. What are the outcomes that are expected of them by their stakeholders, their own stakeholders. You also need to understand that they do have partners and people that are linked in some sort of way to their business. And of course, you need to be able to meet all those expectations. But the best way to meet this myriad of expectations is to approach it from a data-driven point of view. So across all the pillars that you see on the screen, everything here is driven by the data. You must understand your customer and you must be able to provide the business value. Now, how do you understand them? You need to learn. And now learning could be learning comes in two ways. So of course you need to understand how they work, but also you could actually let data learn them. So for instance, if I understand the behavior of people who apply for a job in a company who have a set of expected skills, then that process can be quickly delivered in compile time and meeting the business values of the stakeholder or the customer. Now, let me explain what I mean. In a world that is absolutely with population busting out everywhere and everybody has their peculiar needs, you need to understand the concept of personalization. And that leads us to using data to drive enterprise architecture. So the data architecture in some sort of way has to feed into the enterprise architecture or the data in its raw form has to have a pipeline feed that allows it to be modified into information that can be used by the enterprise architect. For instance, if you go ahead and set up a marketing engagement and you do not have targeted people, then what would happen is that you can't really define in real metrics the conversion ratio of leads to opportunities or from opportunities to business, to real deals. So you need to understand, of course, things like personalization. I wouldn't see why someone would be selling, for instance, um, a new let me just use an instance. For instance, trying to sell ice to the Eskimos. That's absolutely unnecessary, because of course they have it in abundance. And another thing you could actually do is trying to find what we call actual data-driven, make what we call data-driven decisions. So you need to understand who are the most very much and ready markets that you have. And of course, those are the people you go out to first before you start, you continue with trying to convert other people that are not necessarily in need of the solution based on time and space. Now, to design, one of the things you need to do after you have gone through the data side of things, and you are looking at what are the business needs and how do I identify the business needs, what other needs do they even have that they are not aware of at the moment, and all that. These are things that are answered by data. Now, the next thing you need to do is to define your services. Now, your services, they are just a set of values that you use to meet business outcomes. And of course, these services may not necessarily come as the routine architectural diagrams that we use. They may come as products. You may have to manage products and define the services in such a way that the services are interlinked. So the services should be able to talk to each other. And that's where the enterprise architect of today and tomorrow has to understand the place of scripting, has to understand the place of APIs, and has to understand that this economy would end up finally, the world economy would end up definitely being an API-driven economy. And of course, this is how this is delivered. The services must be able to talk to each other. And not only would they be able to talk to each other, talk in input, they need to be able to meet customer needs. Repeated again, customer needs. And okay, now going ahead. Now, by saying service design, we just mean how do the services, the set of services that you have defined, plug together, how do they also operate on their own? So a customer or a stakeholder or a partner, whatever you call him, may not necessarily need to have access or may not need all the services in your portfolio of services. So what he may need may just be a bit of your services. And then he should be able to go for that bit he needs and be able to meet his outcomes, his desired outcomes with it. If he's not able to meet with those outcomes with just a bit of your service, then your service should be intertwined and interconnected in such a way that they could easily switch the customer in compile time, I mean in the user's idea of being performance, they should be able to switch that user to an ancillary service or another service altogether without any waste of time, waste of business time. Now, and how do we do this? The steps, there are about 3 steps here that we have. And of course, the way we approach it is after we have defined and determined what the value proposition is from data that we have gotten, the next thing we need to do is to understand what I generally call cyborg. So cyborg is just a way of managing the enterprise EA as a service customer. Now, these customers could be suppliers, paying customers, and the likes. Now, you have to find a way to be able to ensure that there's a seamless working of suppliers, inputs, processes, and outputs, and outputs. So now, what do I mean by input? Input, of course, would actually mean your intelligence that is bespoke to a certain case in view. Let me explain what I mean. Now, for instance, if you backtrack a little, you will understand that in the old days we were used to a whole lot of frameworks. Now, frameworks in and of themselves have not disappeared from the scene. The only thing we have done is that we've made frameworks to be seamlessly usable. Let me explain. Now, if I have a framework, for instance, around data residency, that's a compliance framework, kind of, and of course, those need to be adhered to, or business outcomes would be negatively affected. Now, what would I do? The best thing to do is to build this compliance framework into the EA as a service pipeline. Now, if you go back to my previous slides, you will see where this pipeline right here has to be automated and be able to address some of the business pillars that we see today all over most verticals. For instance, PCI DSS and stuffs like that, and compliance requirements like ISO 27001. Now, you should be able to build the architect of today does not just put it on paper. He has to be able to build this as what we call invisible services within the solution set. So within the solution set that we are talking about right here, there are invisible services that have been designed by the EA to run on their own. So they don't need to be kicked off. They don't need to be stopped. They must run as far as that service or service portfolio is concerned. Now, what all we are trying to do is to bring what exists in the business landscape into the technical landscape. In the business landscape, you can't avoid some of this compliance requirements and privacy requirements and all that. You must adhere to them. Now, if the business landscape says that this must be adhered to, the enterprise architecture landscape must be able to build it in without any need to start up the service. It has to be natural with the service offering. So this is one thing that's extremely important when you're looking at enterprise architecture as a service. Now, the other thing here also addressed looks at a bit about storytelling. Yeah, so this is something that is extremely that could be very strange to the old school enterprise architect who is a core technical person and is used to, of course, dealing with binary code 0 or 1. So the art of storytelling is trying to sell an idea to top management. So, for instance, just for instance, if I have a CIO and the lead architect, the enterprise architect must be able to ensure that that enterprise architecture remains relevant to the CIO. How is he going to do that? The way he's going to do that is to ensure that all the rules of engagement as far as business is concerned that could affect business outcomes are also built into the enterprise architecture as a given, not as a service that is optional to be picked from the portfolio. Now, so these are some of the things that, and the storytelling approach is also getting their buy-in. Now, explaining why things are done this way on the architecture, explaining also how it would benefit them, explaining what business outcomes it would bring in clear terms. For instance, in percentages, in metrics that are defined and clear in business and are expressed in business language. For instance, we would have a 30% increase in PBX, profit before tax, if so and so is done. Now, why is it possible? Because we have increased simultaneous transactions to so and so we can host entry into the European markets. You could clearly see what the business outcomes are in clear metrics. And when you sell them that way, they stick with the customer. So the next thing to look at is time. So time is a major factor in business, of course. Now, and sometimes there is always what we call the first mover advantage. Now, when you've innovated and you have a catalog of solutions that you want to unleash to the market, it is extremely important that time is of essence. Now, how do we ensure that time is of essence? We cannot be 100% sure that we've ticked all boxes to meet the business environment. But all we know is that we have been careful enough, like I mentioned initially, to build all the compliance requirements, all the privacy requirements, all the security and everything into the solution to the best of our knowledge, and we have tested them. Now, time being critical to us taking of the market is very, very much achievable if we have an automated and iterative delivery system for consulting, for existing in a business as an enterprise architect. Remember that the role of the enterprise architect in the new business environment that we see today definitely has to change. He doesn't have to be a recipient from business that interprets to IT. He has to be a trusted advisor, like I mentioned, to business, and also a delivery agent that rolls out the solutions and services that he himself had crafted. Now, so this iterative delivery.
Just want to, so we're getting some questions in, and we only have a few minutes left in the session, so I just want you to be aware of that.
Okay, yeah, I could take one or two questions if we don't mind. Or would you mind us taking it up again?
Well, yeah. So why don't you get to a point where you can wrap up, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, yeah. So what I was trying to say in essence with time is that the delivery of the solution has to be automated and repetitive. So the more we see changes in the environment, the solution should be nimble enough to switch. Now, that reminds us that the enterprise architect as a consultant has to understand the place of frameworks like DevOps, agile environments, and all that. And just to recap, these are some of the points that we've mentioned. Internal management consulting, services oriented in the sense that you have to have a portfolio of services that address directly in clear terms business outcomes. And then the specialist skills that I talked about, you have to come into the role with a business mindset. You have to be collaborative across every bit, every nook and cranny of the enterprise. And of course, execution is extremely key. So maybe we can go on with the questions and answers.
That's perfect. So why don't you go ahead and stop sharing your presentation. And so first off, Uche, I just want to tell you this was a great presentation. It really comes back to reminding us how important it is for people to look at business execution and the skills associated with that. And so our very first question we have is actually related to that. And the question is, you know, in the future, the new version of the enterprise architect, they're going to have a certain set of skills. And I heard you talk about business skills, and storytelling. I'm curious, what are some of the skills that are going to be needed in the person that takes that role on and is effective?
Okay, yeah. So, well, first of all, from a business point of view, those are business skills, understanding the business landscape, storytelling, and all that. Beside that, also, this enterprise architect needs to be able to understand agile architectures, agile and DevOps, because of course the whole business environment now is DevOps driven. So you need to understand that. You need to understand a little bit of scripting and automation, and be able to read and interpret some of these agile scripts for yourself. So those are some of the skills that are very, very important.
And you know, you talk about the business goals and objectives. You talked about cyborg being an important process, and the behavior of people as it's associated with NUBA, the needs, outcome, benefits approach that you discussed. And so, what I'm curious about, and what I heard in the question that I just saw, is basically, how do we achieve the business goals inside of EA today and tomorrow?
Yes. So the way we do it is that we first of all need to define the services to address business outcomes in data terms. For instance, we need this year, we must meet 30% incremental profit from last year. So how do we do it? Now, that has to be clearly defined in numeric business terms. Now, when that is done, the enterprise architect goes behind to say, for this to happen, I have to be nimble enough to either reduce cost by using, for instance, dynamically scaled services, or increase profit by engaging new markets using technology means without incurring the cost of physical presence. So these are some of the things that, of course, the enterprise architect has to sit down and plan and bring out services that would achieve the clearly defined business outcomes of 30% incremental profit.
Yeah, it sounds to me a little bit like what you're talking about, Uche, is the handshake and relationship between the enterprise architect and the various departments in our company, right? So, yes. You know, what I think I'm hearing is, look, we're not, as enterprise architects, we're not alone, right? We're actually here to serve multiple interests. So you mentioned the idea of growing sales or profits by 30%. Well, if that's the case, the architecture team probably is going to have relationships in multiple areas in the company. In that example, like, who would they be talking to? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So yes, so there are key stakeholders. So the who's are the customers, and the customers are actually the people that own the business outcomes. So for instance, the CEO may need to scale down a little bit. And then he comes to you and says, I want a 50% drop in my spend. And so there's negotiation that goes on. And then you land at 40%. And then that person becomes a customer. And another customer could be the CFO and his team. And then another person could actually be the extreme end cleaner. How is the cleaner affected? The cleaner is affected when he knows that what's in it for him would be a salary raise if this business outcomes are achieved. So that is extremely important. So the whole enterprise is the EA's customer, and added to that, their external cycles.
No, that's really great. I totally, I love the way you're approaching this, because what I noticed is how you bring together the idea of technology as a way of achieving collaboration between groups and individuals. And technology is a really important thing, but what I hear you saying is, hey, if you don't have those relationships, if you're not asking the right questions, if you're missing out on an opportunity to engage with someone that's potentially impacted. What are some of the concerns if those things are not happening?
Yes, that's a great question, Jeff. Yes. So one of the concerns that I've found out is that most times some of these customers don't want to talk in groups. So they feel, okay, there's this entitlement mentality across most enterprises. It's not that the customers are bad themselves. It's just a way of securing information also. So they don't necessarily open up to information. So for those, in my experience, what I've done is that I approached those areas with data. Let me explain. I was working on a project and I had this head of finance, and he didn't want to give me the numbers because clearly they are extremely sensitive. You would be accessing information like the salary of the CEO. So what I did was I explained the solution to him, where we were using a solution where you could redact data and obfuscation that kind of scrambles the name of the CEO, so you don't even know who owns what, and then changes the data and kind of suppresses it, like the kind of thing you see when banks send you emails. They suppress your account number. So I told him, just send it to me, look at the solution. We call it DLP. It will suppress everything. You don't need to worry about me seeing anything because, of course, I won't see it. And then this is how. And before I knew it, he was one of my best customers. So we need to find. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I love it. I mean, what I hear in that is, look, you're looking for the way to engage with the customer at their entry point.
Yes.
And it's really brilliant. Listen, we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for their questions today. Uche, this was an extraordinary presentation. I know I took some great notes, and I'll be taking some things out of this for my customers as well. And I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this with us today. And for all of you that are coming back in 15 minutes at the top of the hour, please remember that when we shut this link down, we'll be reopening it then, so you can join for our next presenter. And we'll look forward to another great presentation today on Enterprise Architecture Live. Thanks so much.